question here, the purely utilitarian argument. By calling insulting reviewers who ask where you get your morals, you also deplore the, quote, the self-satisfaction that simply assumes whether or not religion is metaphysically true, that at least it stands for morality. But I'm not sure that argument is all that contemptible, as witness two pieces of evidence. George Washington, quote, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to the prosperity of a nation, religion is the indispensable support. Tends to lend itself toward a healthy polity. And the second is a kind of counterexample, which is the history of the 20th century, during which you have the communist regimes, that is to say, the regimes that were officially and aggressively atheist, caused the deaths of, you name the number, Bob Conquest, I think, is about 60 million, isn't it? 60 million of their own people, which dwarfs any number that the Crusaders may have slain in the 12th century.
Well, I have a whole chapter about this in my book.
All right.
And partly because I do think it's a very serious question. And I put it like this. First, the regimes of fascism and National Socialism, the so-called Axis powers, who would be up in the same class of figures of mass murder, were, in the case of the Mussolini-Franco forces, effectively nothing more than the right wing of the Roman Catholic Church. That you'll have to admit, the Church has itself had to admit, that whether it's Croatia, the Ustasha, Hungary, the Arrow Cross,
Croatia, not less willing. But
it's effectively fascism movement to the Catholic right. National Socialism is pagan and in some ways anti-clerical.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Okay.
Pagan in some ways anti-clerical, but it never breaks its concordat with the Church.
Right.
The Church reciprocates by having prayers by the order of the Vatican for Hitler's birthday every year till the very end, and then by rescuing, even after the National Socialist regime, the Nazi regime is at an end, helping its wanted people to escape to other clerical fascist dictatorships in South America. This has all been attested many, many times and apologized for by the Church, I think not enough. To say nothing of the preachments down the years of anti-Semitism. And the third leader of the Axis, is the Japanese emperor, is actually a god. A god. To whom everyone knows it. No one in Japan thought you could possibly have morality if you didn't agree that Hirohito was God. Where would morality come from? If we didn't have the emperor, we wouldn't know what to do. People would be screwing in the streets. That's where it gets you.
Well,
now, Stalinism, because I'm not ducking your question. All right. Okay, until 1917, millions of Russians have been told for millions of years, millions of Russians have been told for hundreds of years, that the Tsar is the head of the Church, which he was, of the Russian Orthodox Church, that the leader of the country should be something a little more than human. He's not a god, but he's a little more than, he's not quite divine, he's a holy father. If you're Joseph Stalin, you shouldn't be in the dictatorship business if you don't know how to exploit an inheritance like that of millions of credulous, servile people. And what does he do? Lysenko's biology, miracles. We can have 3 harvests a year if we believe in Lysenko's biology. Inquisition, heresy hunt, orthodoxy. Everything comes from the top and must be thanked for and groveled for. A complete replication of the preceding theocracy. For your argument to have any force at all, you'd have to point to a society that adopted the teachings of Lucretius, Spinoza, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Albert Einstein, and then fell into famine, dictatorship, torture, and genocide. And you won't, I think, be able to point to such.
You surely.
That's what you need for a level playing
field.
That's
that's slippery work. You should feel a pang now, I think. You're not going to say that what Stalin did to the peasants in Ukraine was the fault of the Russian Church.
Well, the Russian Orthodox Church always was on his side.
It may have.
The Ukrainian Orthodox wouldn't have been at that point, but the Russian Orthodox Church, as you know, split because the hierarchy stayed with his regime, as it does with all such regimes, because we have to render unto Caesar.
You truly wish to blame the crimes of Joseph Stalin on Christianity?
No, that would be slippery. No, I'm very careful to say. Stalin is gifted a legacy of backwardness, servility, and credulity inculcated by Christianity, and he replicates the conditions of a political theocracy, and he keeps the church in his corner all throughout the war and throughout the collectivization. Look it up. The church had to split on the question. Those who didn't like it had to leave for America. And the religious mentality is very clearly shown in the totalitarian mass movements of leader worship and the Führer principle and their heresy hunts and proclamations of miracles. Yes, it's an allotropic form of the same thing.